Hey, my name's Bruce Truax, and this is my speech on why the fetus is a person. The issue of abortion is an extremely divisive issue in our times. There are legitimate arguments on both sides. However, if you were to study the issue logically and carefully and with an open mind, you would soon realize that the pro-life view is the only academically honest view if one accepts the idea of human rights. The key question in all of this is, does the fetus have human rights? And if so, when? Human rights are limited to persons and persons only. Therefore, much of the discussion focuses on establishing or disestablishing the personhood of the fetus. First I need to consider several of the pro-choice arguments. The first several arguments address. First is the claim that abortion is oppressive to women. Pro-choice feminists claim that women cannot control their own lives, better themselves, or fulfill their dreams if they cannot control their bodies, which is code for they cannot control whether or not they get pregnant. Pro-choice feminists claim that outlawing abortions forces women to perform unsafe abortions that often result in mutilation or even death. According to the World Health Organization, 21.6 million women experience an unsafe abortion worldwide every year. 47,000 women die from complications from unsafe abortions each year, bringing the number to 13% of all maternal deaths. This argument, however, is worthless if the fetus does in fact have human rights. Let me use an example to illustrate this point. If single mothers below the poverty line were allowed to kill their children, life would be a lot easier for them. Better still, the number of people below the poverty line would decrease. The only problem with this is that children have human rights and are considered persons. If fetuses have human rights, any oppression of women that did go on would be irrelevant, no matter how horrible it was. Let's move on to the pro-choice arguments that do address the personhood of the fetus. First is what I call the scientific pro-life argument. Bill Nye is a vocal advocate for this argument. He says, when it comes to women's rights with respect to their reproduction, I think you should leave it to the woman. He claims that many fertilized eggs do not attach to the uterine wall and therefore die. This is called spontaneous abortion. According to the National Center for Biotechnology Information, spontaneous abortions run as high as 40%. This is a very hard argument to answer for pro-life. After all, why would we protect a single-cell organism's life if it was very likely to die? It definitely points to the impersonhood of the fetus. However, there are two things to consider. First, it is illogical to assume that because an organism is more likely to die at a certain stages, then that organism is not a person. Second, it doesn't prove positively that the fetus isn't a person. One of the reasons that the pro-life position is viable is because you cannot prove that the fetus isn't a person. Let me use an example. If you were hunting in the evening and in the twilight, you saw a shape in the distance. It's blurry enough so that you would not be able to tell whether it is a person or a deer. It would certainly be immoral of you to shoot. Worse, you would be convicted of manslaughter if it turned out to be a person. Pro-choice advocates tend to respond to this rebuttal by attempting to prove the impersonhood of the fetus philosophically. Pro-choice advocates tend to be postmodern in their approach to personhood. Their name suggests this. They, after all, believe that women can choose to believe whether or not the fetus is a person. This view, of course, has major flaws. First among them would be the idea that one set of entities, person or not, could choose whether another set of entities are people and have human rights. The human rights abuses would be monstrous, hard, given abortion. Given that the second group of entities do not have a choice in their value. Their first philosophical argument relies on the idea that society is only responsible for people to interact with that society. Each society has a set of rights it must give up to all of its true members. If a person does not interact with that society, he or she is not a member of that society. In other words, for an entity to be considered a person by a society, that entity must interact with that society. For example, the U.S. government is not responsible for people living in Australia. The problem with this argument is that it's very dangerous to base personhood off of how much interaction you get with someone else. What about people living secluded lives? Don't they have human rights? Worse, it suggests we do not have a moral responsibility to anybody that our society cannot see, hear, or touch. Personhood must be more than this. Personhood, or human rights, must be more than this. The second pro-choice philosophical argument comes in the form of a scenario. Columnist Tanya Pilarman put it like this. Suppose you were to return home one day and find a stranger camped in your living room and peacefully eating your food. Suppose he told you that he could not live outside your house. Moreover, he informs you that he needs your food and clothing and someone to talk to. He needs your presence much of the day. He becomes more demanding. You must work less, earn less, give up jogging. Moreover, you find out you do not have enough food for two people. Your life is in danger. Flowerman says you may be very upset, but if it came down to the wire, you would probably kick him out of the house. And most people would agree that would be an amoral action. This argument supposes that in abortion, the fetus has camped inside the mother's space. It doesn't try to address the personhood question. It does try to address the personhood question in a roundabout way. It essentially says that even if the fetus were a person, the mother would not be responsible. The problem with this is that no matter how much of a horrible situation the mother is in, the mother is still responsible for the fetus's death. Abortion is not a passive act where the mother allows the fetus to die. It is a direct act of killing. A more accurate analogy would be you finding someone in your home eating your food. The person refuses to leave you, so you kill him or her. This would be illegal and immoral. However you look at it, if the fetus is a person, it has intrinsic human rights. So far, all I've done is to try to disprove the pro-choice arguments. Now I'm going to try to prove that the fetus is a person positively. First, there are scientific studies that demonstrate that the fetus can feel pain. Pain receptors, which are found in the fetus as early as 7 weeks and no later than 20 weeks. In fact, at 8 weeks, the fetus have been shown to react to touch and to thrash as a response to surgery. These studies are contradicted by other scientific studies, admittedly. Even if they weren't contradicted, they do not completely prove that the baby is a person. Nevertheless, if true, they do point to personhood. Secondly is the fact that pro-choice advocates have a poor definition of what is personhood. They see the personhood of the fetus as decided by the mother until the baby is out of the mother's womb. This essentially means they define the personhood of the fetus based on its position or place, literal place in the place, whether or not it is inside the womb. This, of course, is a ridiculous idea. I cannot imagine the results if a society decided that the people in a certain position relative to them weren't peak persons. Pro-life advocate Josh Graham suggests that we base personhood off of humans. We cannot base it off of development. Some babies are born premature, and few will be able to look them in the eye and kill them. We cannot base it off of intelligence, and that mentally disabled would have less rights then. The only viable approach would be to base it off of humanness. This is the only thing that all people with intrinsic human rights have in common. Graham said, quote, "In other words, if we all have an equal right to life, then we must have something in common that demands that we treat each other equally, and we must have that property equally. Humanness needs to be based off of genetics. Humanness needs to be based off of genetics, as it is the only clear indicator of humanity. Fetuses from the time of conception until birth have an entire human genome. Therefore, fetuses from the time of conception are persons and therefore have human rights." In conclusion, I've read all this. Okay, go ahead. In conclusion, we are continuing the greatest genocide in human history if we don't ban abortion. Across the globe, over 2 billion babies have been aborted since 1966. Globally, 20% of established pregnancies end with induced abortion. Historically, one has to go back to the 14th century and the Black Plague, where 30% of humanity perished to find abortion catastrophe.